أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
بسم الله إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بك من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال عز وجل في الكتاب المجيد يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. وقال عز وجل يعلمون ظاهرا من الحياة الدنيا وهم عن الآخرة هم غافلون. We begin by praising Allah Azza wa Jal, seeking forgiveness on this day, recognizing our shortcomings, recognizing that we are the one who have done wrong, and seeking Allah's pleasure, mercy, generosity on this day and every day. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive and show mercy to all of us who are here and those who couldn't make it. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us to the straight path as we verify this pledge that we have made to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, recognizing that there is no one worthy of worship except Allah, our highest priority, and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his messenger and his servant. The ayah that I recited, those who claim to have faith, profess faith, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, be people of taqwa, be God conscious. As you are well aware how to be God conscious in your transaction and in your daily life. And do not let death approach you except that you have submitted to Allah, that you have become a Muslim, the other ayah that I recited, they are those who know يَعْلَمُونَ ظَاهِرًا from the outward manifestation or superficial life of this world. They are well aware of how things work in the marketplace and in the economy and in the finance and in political science and in physical science, astronomy, geology, in languages, the construct of a language. يَعْلَمُونَ ظَاهِرًا مِنَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَهُمْ عَنِ الْآخِرَةِ هُمْ غَافِلُونَ. Yet they are not aware of the hereafter, the things to come. So I wanted to remind you with these two ayah, and I want to continue from where we left off last Friday, Jumu'ah, and that is our relationship with the Book of Allah in this month, specifically and in general as believers. The Quran, it requires a certain understanding before we come to the Quran, before we open the Book of Allah. One is that we need humility. We need humility. And second, that we need to seek guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The dua, the direction that we're going, we're seeking Allah's guidance and forgiveness. And that's when we open the book, Yahdi lillati hiya aqwam. That's the principle. It guides to those who are upright, morally upright, upright in their belief system, upright in their understanding and in their action. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides us to the book. And ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. This is huda, guidance for those who profess or who have taqwa, people of taqwa. And we talked about how non-Muslims, when they convert and they become Muslims, one thing that you would find throughout their stories that they tell you, right? One common theme is that they were looking for something. There was something missing from their life. And so when they find it, they run towards it, they rush towards it. And the dilemma of people who are born Muslim is that it's in my pocket, my Islam. I'm a Muslim. My 10 generations prior were Muslims. So the dilemma is that I am a Muslim. It's a thing that's given. So they don't cherish that faith, that attitude that should belong to people of guidance, inshallah. And so we seek from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guidance and humility as we learn from the Quran. I wanted to talk about, inshallah, and this is something that you have to pay attention to. I know this is a khutbah, but I want to give you something that you walk back, inshallah, learning something. And khutbah tends to be emotional speech sometimes, not all the time. But one thing about the coherence of the Quran, the way the Quran is structured, I mentioned that when we teach our children as a methodology, we make a big mistake. We teach them to recite, memorize, which is fine, but to also go translation of the short surahs, right? So the Makki surahs are from the 30th juz. And it would be perhaps better in terms of methodology of how to teach our children, to teach them from the beginning of the Quran, which is the Al-Baqarah, Al-Imran, Al-Fatiha, and so An-Nisa, and so on and so forth. Why? Because those stories, the morals in the lessons in there are much clearer, and they are not as fire and brimstone, right? Because you want them to develop this relationship. So the Quran has a methodology, the way it's constructed, and I would call it perhaps the 7 components. And I want to give you basic gist of how the Quran is constructed. So when you open the book from anywhere, you have a good idea. We talked about the 3 themes. The 3 themes that are often repeated in the Quran. You should know this. Your children should know this. Our children, our mothers and sisters should know this, that the Quran talks about 3 themes. 3 major topics, if you want to describe them. Tawheed, how Allah is one, right? And it gives you arguments. The story of Ibrahim is full of arguments. Look at the stars, the moon, right? The sun, the big one. oh, my Lord doesn't set. All of these things disappear. My Lord doesn't disappear. How could I call them God? Right? So these are moral arguments. And the one who says, I give life and death, same person, another person with Ibrahim alayhi salam, and he says, my Lord raises the sun from the east. Make it come out from the other side. And so he gave logical proofs. So Quran is full of those, and especially in the beginning chapters and surahs. As opposed to you're teaching, because you're trying to teach your children, but what they're reading is Suratul Lahab, what happens with Lahab and his wife, right? Their dilemma. What happens with Alam Tara, the people of field, the people of elephant, right? So this is the reason why perhaps teaching the kids who are about 6, 7 and above from the beginning of the Quran. So the first component, and I want to talk about 7 components here. It starts from Al-Fatiha all the way to the 7th juz. What's in this section of the Quran, the first 7 juz? You'll find the stories of, it's the main audience, right? The Muslims are the audience, obviously, specifically. But specifically, there are people there are mentioned in those 7 juz or so, for the majority of that part. And that is Bani Israel, the children of Israel, right, the Jews, and the Christians. And they're sometimes called Ahlul Kitab, the people of the book. Together, they're understood to be people of the book, meaning the Jews and the Christians. And so the nations that were previously Muslims, they were considered people of Tawheed. They worship one God. It's the story about them, how Allah gave them everything, and yet they became ingrateful. And so Allah took away, سَيَقُولُ السُّفَهَاءُ, the second juz is actually talking about the changing of Qibla. But it's not this changing of the Qibla, the physical Qibla only. It's the changing of the guard. And what's happening is that the previous nations that were there, that were given the imam, like the leadership of this entire population of the human population, they were the people of Tawheed. Now it's changed from those nations to the Muslims of Arabia, the Arabs, and the Muslims who accept the message of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's the changing of the guards. First 7 juz, it's all about that. And tazkiyah, obviously that is the main theme of the Quran. So when you're reading about Bani Israel, it's talking about how they made mistakes. It talks about how the Thalithu Thalatha, 1 of 7, the Trinity, right, is a wrong aqidah, is a misconception about God and how the correct belief system should be. It talks about how, look at the example of Isa alayhi salam. And it says, and look at the example of Adam. He didn't have mother or father. You think that just because Jesus is born without a father, he's God? Quran is very explicit because Allah is talking to his servants. He doesn't play political science or political games, right? He tells as is. That's what 7 juz are all about. The second component of the Quran, if you're reading the Quran, and you would come across An'am, Surah Tawbah, which is the last surah, right? These are the surahs that are in there. And it is talking, so it's from juz number 7 to juz number 11. It's talking to the mushrikeen of Arabia. And the conversation before, the argument is against the people of the book, and it's wrapped up. Muslims are here, and they're going to lead the markaz of Tawheed, the center of Tawheed, which is obviously the leadership of teaching, because now there will be no prophet after the Prophet Muhammad. The second group, right, that second component, it's the main audience is mushrikeen. And then they're counted all the wrongs that they have been doing in the name of God. They sacrifice, and it's very explicit. But that part that's supposed to go to God, they will keep it for themselves. But the part that's supposed to go for their idols, they will throw away to the idols. How come you don't give God what's due to him, that you set out from the very beginning? It talks about their belief system. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at the end of Surah Tawbah, he tells them, now from Arabia, right, it's the end, the conclusion. After the Prophet has come, you have no more excuses. That's it. Accept Islam or else. And they were told to leave Arabia. That is a historical fact. If you read the Quran, it is that this is what it says. Why? Because this was the markaz of Tawheed. This is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided that this was His place, this was His masjid, Masjid al-Haram and the surrounding area. So this, the main audience from Juz 7 to 11 is the mushrikeen of Arabia, the general mushrikeen that were there. And then in the third component, which is from Juz number 11 through 18, so we're almost at the half of the Quran. It's Surah Yunus, and then it ends with Surah An-Nur. Okay, and this is from there, and then the component number 4, which goes from Furqan to Al-Ahzab, right? The Confederates, how they came to fight the Muslims, and then Surah Saba, which is component number 5, till all the way to Al-Hujurat, which talks about the manners, right, that a Muslim community should have. These three components, the third, fourth, and fifth that I mentioned, from Juz number 11 all the way down to Juz number 26, it talks about purification, tazkiyah. It talks about warning. If you read it, it talks about the day of judgment and the logical proofs and the arguments that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set forth, that why it's coming, and you should be prepared for it. And anyone who has a sound heart and a sound mind reading these would say, yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is directing He's talking to me and my psychology, and He's directing me to the day that's coming. And this is what the Quran is. It's all about nasiha, right? Sincere advice. But what is this advice about? It is not about the worldly thing. It's how to live in this life attaining purification. And that is what the book of Allah is about. Unfortunately, sometimes when we don't have the right focus, and I'm going to talk about the last two parts, inshallah, the sixth and seventh components. But unfortunately, when we don't have the right focus, Quran becomes the book of mas'ala, right? What is it? If some lady has to nail polish and wudu, then they're going to say, does it say it in the Quran? Right? If they have to, how do we perform the salah? Is it this way or that way or this way or this way or such? They get caught into tertiary details. And the Quran is talking and calling you back to primary function, primary living, right? Not to cheat, not to wailul lil mutaffifin, wailul likulli humazatil lumaza, right? What are they talking about? Your character. أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُّ الْيَتِيمِ. He's the one who's pushing people away. The yatim, the orphan. It's talking about character. And to build character, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us 5 tools to build that personality, because it's all about يَعْلَمُونَ ظَاهِرًا مِنَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. They know, they're well aware of how to live this life and function and perform really well. وَهُمْ عَنِ الْآخِرَةِ هُمْ غَافِلُونَ. But they're heedless of the hereafter. And that's the important point that Allah is calling us to, that don't be heedless. And so these components, they talk about in general, right? Tazkiyah, purification, warning for those people who are not listening or paying attention. And then good news for those who are obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَأَقُولُ قَوْلِي هَذَا وَأَسْتَغْفِرُ اللَّهَ لِي وَلَكُمْ وَلِسَائِرِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. Before I talk about the last 2 components, what the Quran is all about. The first one, we said, it talks about the first 7 Jews, but the first component is talking to main audience, Jews and Christians. The second component, right, from 7 through 11, is talking to specifically the mushrikeen of the people who did shirk in Arabia, right? They're the ones that it's talking mostly about it. Obviously, it's not all of it. And generally, Muslims are obviously the audience, the main audience who are listening and reading this book. And then the next 3 components from 11th Juz all the way to 22, Surah Ahzab, it talks to humanity at large, right? People. And then it goes into the 6th component is from Juz 22nd to 20, I apologize. The 6th component is Juz 26 to 28, which is from Surah Qaf to Surah Tahrim. And if you look into it and you read, the main listener or the main audience that's being talked about is um, the leaders of the Quraysh. Apologize. So the last component, it's the leaders of the Quraysh from Surah Al-Mulk to Surah Al-Nas. And so when you hear this, وَيْلٌ لِكُلِّ هُمَزَةٍ لُمَزَةٍ, right, the ayah, أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِأَصْحَابِ الْفِيلِ, it happened. Quraysh knew about the Ashabul Fil. Surah Quraysh, لِإِلَى فِي Quraysh. Right, so the mushrikeen of the Quraysh specifically, they knew. So it's them being talked about. So when we're teaching our children, Allah is speaking in an angry tone with the people of Quraysh. So when we're teaching our children the Quran, specifically the last part in the translation to the younger ones, that is the reason why in terms of methodology, I think it's better to teach them from the beginning of the Quran. So I just wanted to present this, inshallah. Many people are not aware of the way the Quran is constructed. Many times when we have books of tafsir, we tend to read ayah by ayah. We read the translation of an ayah and then go on to another ayah. So that is perfectly fine, but we have to understand how the Quran is coherent in its message. The last thing, inshallah, as we go towards the salah, I want to give you homework, inshallah. And inshallah, I will be returning next Friday for Jummah, and we'll continue to talk about it. Memorize a short surah if you could. It will increase your spirituality. It will increase your knowledge. Your knowledge, your action, and your spirituality in Islam are all connected. You can't be more spiritual by sitting there and just breathing, right? Some people have this idea. That's not people of Quran, okay? So if you're breathing and you're sitting in the dark and you're putting a timer and you're thinking that, you're going to, fly high, it's not going to happen, okay? And good luck. But if, people of the Quran, let's read the Quran, let's practice the Quran, and let's live the Quran, inshallah. So that's number one, memorizing a short surah. If you can't memorize the 4 ayat of Surah Al-Rahman, memorize the first 5 or 6 ayat of Surah Yasin. Those are very easy. The second thing is English translation of the Quran. There are 2 really good ones. Abdul Halim has one. This is something what it looks like. And then Why Islam has this one that they give out. It has a thematic English translation. It's a very beautiful translation of Dr. Mustafa Khattab. So if you get your hand on him, do look for these. I really recommend. And the last thing is to the children, to the young people and old people who are here, there is an app. It talks about emotions, emotional health, and it ties negative thoughts, and it ties into what type of, if you're stressed, if you're feeling weak, if you're feeling jealous, if you're feeling some other feelings, it gives you, if you click on this, then it gives you the dua that the Prophet or the Quran would mention. So it's a beautiful app. It's under the name of Islamistic. Islam, and you know how you write domestic, the last part? Islam, ESTIC, Islamistic. So take a look at that. I think I found a lot of benefit, and I told the children that we teach to utilize that. وَقُولُوا قَوْلِي هَذَا وَاسْتَغْفِرُ اللَّهَ لِي وَلَكُمْ وَلِسَائِرِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَالْمُسْلِمَاتِ رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ رَبِّ اغْفِرْ وَارْحَمْ وَأَنْتَ خَيْرُ الرَّاحِمِينَ اللهم أعنا على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. Oh Allah, accept from us all that we have done. اللهم إني لك صمت وبك آمنت وعليك توكلت وعلى رزقك أفطرت. I know we're not going to break the fast, but I want to remind you of the dua when you sit before you eat. جزاكم الله خير والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.